Taxation is central to development. It provides governments with the funding required to finance the infrastructure on which economic development and growth is based. It creates an environment in which business and wealth creation is carried on. It also plays a defining role in shaping the way in which activities of government are carried out. Across the continent, the renewed focus to raise additional financing for development and narrow the resource gap by accelerating domestic resource mobilization has been at the center of the development strategy in recent years. However, to fully harness the potential in domestic resources, sealing existing loopholes associated with the tax revenue under collection remains a critical issue. Africa's economy plunged into recession for the first time in 25 years because of the pandemic, and we are all looking for a way out. This is where the recently signed global agreement led by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development comes into the picture. In a statement by the Secretary General of the OECD, Matthias Cormann, he said, after years of intense work and negotiations, this historic package will ensure that large multinational companies pay their fair share of tax everywhere. This package does not eliminate tax competition, as it should not, but it does set multilaterally agreed limitations on it. It also accommodates the various interests across the negotiating table, including those of small economies and developing jurisdictions. It is in everyone's interest that we reach a final agreement among all inclusive framework members as scheduled later this year. Today, we look at reforming Africa's tax systems. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Now joining me is Suraj Oyewale. He is a fiscal policy and tax analyst who describes himself as an economist by academic training and an accountant by professional training. Suraj, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Tolu. Happy to join you today.
Fantastic. All right, let's start with some understanding of the tax structures as it is across the continent. There have been various criticisms of how African governments and countries have operated their tax systems. And we've seen people who are trying to reform or in some way find a way around it and bring them up to the 21st century. We've seen countries try to bring more citizens into the tax net as well, and even raising taxes in response to the pandemic in particular. So let's look at what some of the issues have been in taxation across the continent that you've noticed.
Okay, I think I would broadly classify the issues into three. The first one has to do with the government themselves. The other issue has to do with the taxpayers. And the final one has to do with the system, the structure of the economy itself. So let me start with the one that has to do with government. You notice that a lot of people in Africa really don't have trust in their government, because they believe that whatever taxes they pay are going to eventually, end up in private pockets. Somebody spends their taxes not for common good, but for private uses or some political, white good chase. So because of this reason, most countries, most Africans really don't want to pay their taxes compared to, other countries where there is a high rate of compliance. Most people here really don't want to pay their taxes, So that one has to do with, the perception of government. So I would say this is the first issue, with tax, system in Africa. The second one has to do with the taxpayers themselves. Sometimes the taxpayers want to pay, but because they don't know how to go about it, the processes can be quite complicated, So that's another issue that that was actually that's a big issue for tax system in Africa. And the third issue which I've identified is the one that has to do with with the system. The tax laws are just, some of them are just archaic. They are not in tune with global best practices. But although there have been some improvements in recent times, but this is another issue which I've noticed. So I think it is a combination of all these political issues that have to do with the system, as well as issues that have to do with taxpayers that have really made Africa not to have performed on a very, very high level with respect to tax system.
I want to follow up on the first note, and that comes to a social contract kind of conversation. the expectations of the responsibilities of citizens in terms of what they give to government and what they expect. So when it comes to this tax, I know I've had these conversations over the years in media, but Nigerians particularly and others across the continent will tell you, but I provide my water, I provide my own security, I provide my own electricity. They can list a number of things that government should be responsible for through the provision of taxes, but yet citizens are responsible for. This particular gap, how do African governments address it? Okay,
first and foremost, I would like to state that the fact that the government are not using your taxes for the right thing does not really justify not paying taxes. Okay, there are laws, there are tax laws. Not doing that itself is not, you're not carrying out your civic responsibility. Okay, the fact that the taxes are not being used well does not really justify non-evasion of taxes. So that said, the government themselves have to be responsible. Okay, and that's why there are elections. Okay, these are issues. I can't remember the last time anybody talked about taxes during election protests in Nigeria. In the US, for example, tax is a very major issue when it comes to elections, but that hardly happens here. Okay, Biden was talking about taxing the wealthy,
corporate taxes.
So these are issues that in advanced economies, tax is a major issue. But here, nobody really cares about tax. Why all these political decisions are being made? Why elections are happening? Why campaigns are happening? So I think it's because of all these issues that many Africans really don't want to do. They don't really raise these questions during the election period. And so people need to hold their leaders responsible. People need to ask questions during the political processes, and I think government themselves have to be very, very responsible. Governments that are not doing well, just change them. Okay, so I think that's where the solution lies.
All right. So towards the end of my first question, you did mention that you started seeing some reforms here in Nigeria, possibly, and then across the continent. Has there been any reform that you think is really going to hit the mark across the continent in terms of bringing more people into the tax net, ensuring that the government is getting more tax revenue, and of course, maybe unfortunately increasing the taxation rates as it may be? Are we starting to see African countries start to get it right in regards to that?
Yes, many African countries are actually doing well. There have been some improvements in recent times. Take the case of Senegal, for example. Senegal recently, digitalized their tax system. So before in Senegal, for most businesses, you had the option of filing your tax returns through electronic means and through the paper means. Now they've gone a little bit digital. So that's the way. And in Nigeria, for example, there have been a lot of initiatives in recent times to reform the tax system. Take, for example, the Finance Act. Starting from 2019, the federal government of Nigeria introduced what is called the Finance Act. What that means is that every year the government can quickly change anything in tax law. Okay, so Finance Act is just a mechanism by the government of Nigeria to reform their tax system every year, to make quick changes. Why not waiting before the whole legislative hall? Okay, so that Finance Act is something that they have been using in Nigeria to reform the tax system. And of course, some other countries, South Africa also have similar things. Kenya is very, very big on digital economy, on digital system. So I think most African countries, a good number of them anyway, especially the big one in particular, are doing some things in that regard. And of course, in Nigeria, for example, if you register a company now, you have to be registered for tax there and then. Okay? So more and more people are being brought into tax nets. So I think there are a number of reforms here and there, not so perfect, but I think there are a number of reforms here and there, which I think are improving the situation of taxes in Africa.
All right, so now let's look at this new global pact that's being led by the OECD. So it's basically reshaping the global tax system, particularly with a focus on the oil and gas, the international oil and gas situation. Now, these efforts are to force multinational companies to pay a fairer share of the tax. And this is a really big step that has gone forward. So it's broken into two pillars. Pillar one is expected to ensure a fairer distribution of profits and taxing rights among companies. So first of all, why are we in a situation where we need to force multinational companies to pay the correct amount of tax, the fair amount of tax that they need to pay, or we just have to throw our hands up or force this kind of situation? Why is it a conversation about forcing them to do the right thing?
Okay, first and foremost, I would like to state that the talk about taxing multinational companies is not really about oil companies. Oil companies, to be honest, in many countries, oil and gas companies is actually one of the most taxed systems, companies, groups of companies in the world. I think it's basically targeting
the
tech companies, digital-based companies who can stay anywhere, because the nature of oil and gas industry is that you need to be physically present before you do carry out the activities. Unlike tech, in which somebody can be in US and making money from Nigeria. Somebody can be in India and making money from Nigeria. So these are the things that are more. These are the kinds of services and activities that are targeted more. With these things. Now, OECD is just, as you are aware, OECD is just an intergovernmental group of nations. 38 nations who have come together to advance some economic interests, majorly promoting the free market economy. And of course, in this one, they have gotten the signing of a lot of other non-OECD countries. You've got even the G7 countries, G20, and a lot of even known, more than 139 countries have actually been having this conversation. So it's a global phenomenon. It's something that is global, and I think it's a fair deal. If you look at it, there have been a lot of talks about digital companies, tech companies who make money without paying taxes in the sources of those revenues. Okay, let's take for example, someone can be in India, upload something on YouTube. 100,000 Nigerians can view that content. Okay, can view that content, and the guy makes money from it. So, and the owner, the enabler of that YouTube, the company enabling the YouTube, could actually be cited in the US. Okay, so you have US, you have India, you have Nigeria. You have the person that uploaded the video in India, the users in Nigeria, and the company the medium that enabled it in the US. So you have this kind of situation in which the way things work at the moment, most likely it is the US that is likely going, because that's where that's the seat of that platform. Okay, that's going to make money. In other words, India is not making money from it, Nigeria is not making money from it, but US is the one that's making money from it. So governments are now saying, you know what? Let's just sit down. Let us cooperate. Let's have a fair share of all these things. A lot things have changed. Technology has changed the world in the last 10, 15 years, and taxes are struggling to tax administrators all over the world are struggling to catch up. Yeah. So that's one of the things that actually led to this talk about having a global cooperation on tax reforms. And I think it's a very, very good deal. Fair distribution of profits for tax purposes, which is the first pillar. It's a very, very good deal. Let every country have a cut in this thing. Okay, not just the country of origin of these firms. And in fact, another aspect of that thing is that... Okay,
Suraj, wait. Before we get into that aspect, we have to take a quick break, because we will talk about the second pillar, but it's also interesting enough, as he said, even the high-income countries like the United States under President Joe Biden have signed. But Nigeria and Kenya here on the continent have withheld their signatures from this global pact. We'll get into why that could be right after this. And this is Business Edge, and we're looking at reforming Africa's tax systems, particularly after a historic and global tax agreement was signed, led by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Still with me is Suraj Oyewale. Suraj, now I believe you wanted to pick up on the second pillar. So the first pillar, as I said earlier, basically looks at ensuring a fair distribution of the profits and taxing rights among the countries. And with the example you gave, something will be in India, it will be users in Nigeria who are giving the views. It's a hosting platform in the US. So there are multiple layers to this. The second pillar seeks to put a floor on competition over corporate income tax by introducing a global minimum corporate tax rate that countries can use to protect their tax bases. Now, they also capped the minimum corporate income tax rate at 15% under this second pillar. So just break it down for us. Is 15%, in your estimation, the magic number in particular for this conversation?
Once again, there is no magic number anywhere, but I personally think 15% is a fair deal. Most countries have their their company income tax rate at 30%. A number of countries have theirs much lower than that. And some don't have at all, especially the small islands. Okay, that don't really need the money. Talk of Bahamas, talk of Bermuda, talk of a country of 100,000 people, 200,000 people, 1 million. They can afford not to not to impose taxes on businesses that attracts people to go there and set up businesses and and make money from there. So I think 15% is a fair deal. If you look at it, most of the countries in Africa have the tax rates. Nigeria has a company income tax rate of 30%, Kenya has 30%, South Africa has 28%. US was 35% before Trump reduced it to 21%. UK is 19%. So you've got a lot of different tax rates among different countries. But what OECD is now proposing is that for multinational transactions, for transactions who probably will not have been caught in this tax net before, why not let us come up with a rate, And so they are proposing 15%, which I think is a fair deal because, better than not. In the current circumstances, most of those businesses don't pay tax in the countries where they make the money. So now they are saying that 15%. 15% appears to be a fair deal. But there are two categories of businesses, of countries rather, that are really against it. You mentioned Nigeria. Nigeria's concern and Kenya's concern is the fact that they believe that 15% is a little bit low. Nigeria has a tax rate of 30%. Kenya has 30% as well. But they are saying that why not let us use why not let us use the domestic tax rate to tax them rather than have a minimum rate. And some countries are actually against it just because they feel that even that 15% is high. Take the case of Ireland. Ireland is home to a lot of multinational companies. Facebook, Microsoft, and all of these companies went to set up their profit center in Ireland because of this low tax of 12.5%. They are saying that if you agree to this thing to raise it to 15%, then it doesn't incentivize all these companies that come to set up their businesses in Ireland. So 15% appears to me like a delicate balance, some sort of balance to satisfy all varying interests. Okay, so I'm sure Nigeria at some point is going to reach some agreement, some consensus on this. But of course, you probably need to put forward your own argument in the first instance. So yes, Nigeria and 8 other countries have refused to, they are holding off their signature to this agreement yet.
Okay, and I find that interesting. So what basically Ireland is saying is that this 15% minimum corporate tax rate takes away its competitive advantage, which it has decided to use. And then Nigeria is saying that 15% is much lower than the 30 we're setting because we're a country that requires the revenues from taxes such as this. So you're saying that you do believe that Kenya and Nigeria at some point in time will come to the table. But in terms of benefits for African countries for signing up, because it's Nigeria and Kenya that are apparently the only holdouts on the continent. So what are the benefits for African nations in signing on to this global pact?
Okay, Africa remains a large market to multinationals, especially the guys the tech guys. So Africa remains a very, very big market for them. So I would think that at the moment, Nigeria, we are not pulling their weight. They are not making much from these activities. And so I believe that signing this agreement would really help African countries to get their own fair share of these revenues being made out of Africa. So for me, I think it's a good development. It's a fair deal. It's something that is going to. Having something taxed at 15% is better than not having it taxed at all.
Yes.
So it is for me a good development for Africa, and I would want to believe that at some point. I think about 20 African countries are actually part of this deal. And I would think if all countries respect, of course, respect whatever is being agreed at this level, then it's going to be some sort of more revenue generation for governments of these African countries, which can be used to fund infrastructure development and other public goods and services.
All right, I found it interesting that countries that are typical tax havens, you mentioned Ireland, which is not a typical tax haven, it's just that they have a low rate, which is a competitive advantage. But places like the Cayman Islands that are typical tax havens that are used to basically take money out and hide it somewhere and keep it somewhere, they also signed on to this agreement. What do you think about that?
Well, I would think such countries, I think in the spirit of fairness, they just thought that at some point, I think we've had a lot of advantage in the past. We've had some of these countries some of these companies have come to set up their head offices, or there are some subsidiaries, their profit-taking subsidiaries in these countries, and they are making money and they're not paying any taxes. Now, it reduces their competitive advantage, but at the same time, the ones that have been set up, they are going to make money from taxes on it, okay? Yeah. So I think it for them, it's also a good deal because it means more money for them, even though because of their low population, they really don't need this money as much as all these bigger countries. Even Ireland, the population of Ireland is already 4 million, 5 million, all 5 million, you know. I mean, you know, all these countries are small countries that don't really need all these, they have other sources of, you know, public finance. So I think Cayman Islands, we would have thought that, okay, yes, even though we had a zero tax rate in the past, but now, the countries of the world are saying that let's do 15% and we sign up to it, no problem. It's more money for us and it doesn't really reduce our own, competitive advantage. And at the same time, one of the when details of those agreements are being made public, there are some other incentives. Countries are still permitted to give some local incentives. Yes. So I believe it's all those ones that all these other islands and smaller countries are going to use to continue to attract all these bigger corporations to their countries. It doesn't mean that other incentives, other domestic incentives are going to be tampered with, just tax rates.
Okay, so very quickly, are there any exemptions in the conversations around this pact right now? Are there any exemptions to this?
There are no exemptions, but don't forget the fact that this is just an indicative recommendation. Countries are expected to respect it, but it doesn't really mean that it is binding on any country. You know, you still have to come home and change your tax laws because
yes.
It is not the OECD pact that is going to be a binding force in Nigeria until Nigeria changes its tax laws. So each country is now meant to come home and adjust their tax laws to reflect this. As a way of respecting this. So I'm not aware of any exemption, but I want to be any exemption like that. But I want to believe that each countries are allowed to continue to give some incentives that make them competitive.
All right. So Suraj, as I let you go, one final question, one sentence answer. For African countries, do you think this is a good step, a good help in working towards reforming the tax systems, acceptance of this pact, joining onto it, and then, of course, as you said, bringing it home, domesticating it, ratifying it, and changing our existing laws and starting the move towards a better tax foundation across the continent?
A very, very good move, I think. A fantastic move. And I think what that means is that, all the digital economy is now going to be taxed better. Nigeria, African countries are going to have more revenue, and it's also, and beyond the money, beyond the taxes, it also shows that there is now a new wave of cooperations among countries all over the world, and African countries are now being taken seriously. African countries are now having a say, on the table. So I think it's a good one. It's a good cooperation. It's something that is actually giving African countries voices, and for the first time, African countries are also being involved in some of these global talks. I think it's a very, very good one for Africa, both on the economic level and even on the social level, and international diplomacy level as well.
All right, Suraj Oyewale, we'll leave the conversation here for now. We will, of course, have to pick it up because, as he stated, Nigeria and Kenya have stated their concerns in relation to this global pact that is being led by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Suraj Oyewale, fiscal policy and tax analyst, joining me on Business Edge. And just to let you know, the other countries that have not signed up include Peru. We also have Estonia, Hungary, Ireland, Barbados, Sri Lanka, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and then, of course, Kenya and Nigeria. Any developments, we will bring them to you. We'll take a quick time out because when we come back, we'll be wrapping up and we have NC4 to watch. Stay with us. Things up with Business Edge today. Let's give you a few stories we're keeping our eyes on to see what the developments may be. Some interesting ones coming from Zimbabwe. The country is introducing yet a new currency. It's been announced that the country is introducing a new dollar note. And according to a statement from the central bank governor, John Magujaya, the new $50 Zimbabwe dollar notes will be in circulation from Wednesday. He explained that authorities would gradually introduce higher denominations. The new note's designs features one of the country's anti-colonial heroes. Then we have the Nigerian Customs Service at the Apapa Area Command that has reported a revenue generation of 366 billion naira for the first half of 2021. This is a 61% increase compared to the same period last year when it was just 227 billion. More investments is headed to Ghana. ENI has announced a significant oil discovery in CTP Block 4 offshore Ghana. Preliminary estimates place the potential of the Iban Akoma complex between 500 and 700 million barrels of oil equivalent in place. And finally, former IMF official Marie Mbuyi has been appointed as the new central bank governor in the Democratic Republic of Congo. She is the first female central bank governor in the bank's 70-year history. She replaces Deogratis Mutombo, who served as the central bank governor for the last 8 years. He has now been appointed to lead Congo's insurance regulator. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget that you can find us on Facebook, on YouTube, on our social media platforms. You can also find us on our mobile app, News Central TV Africa. Download it and take us with you wherever you are so you don't miss any of the news and updates coming to you from the African continent. I'll see you next time. I'm Tolu Lokwe Adelaru Balogun.